can start.
Okay, all right. Welcome to the October meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board. I call the meeting to order. And first of all, I want to turn it over to Jonathan Wang for some housekeeping information. Jonathan?
Thanks, Inga. Hopefully you can hear me all right. So for the people who are here in the Natural Resources Building, in the event of the evacuation, please remain calm, take all your belongings, and proceed to the nearest exit. The staff will be gathering at the evacuation point at 1615 9th Street, and the public is welcome to join us at that point. And just to note that there should be no food or beverages in the meeting room. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Jonathan. Just a quick overview of the public comment process. We will take written questions and comments throughout the meeting, and please follow instructions on your screen and on the meeting notice. I will take the roll call of members now to establish quorum. Peter Goodwin is not going to join us today, but next is Kathleen. Kathleen, you're probably muted.
Present, nothing to declare.
Oh, thank you. Tanya?
Tanya Heikela, no new declarations.
Steve?
Steve Lindley, no new declarations.
Diane?
Diane McKnight, no new declarations.
Anna?
Anna McCulloch, no new declarations.
Obi?
Jayanta Besekara, no new declarations.
Kenny?
Kenny Rose, no new declarations.
Lisa?
Lisa Wanger, no new declarations.
And I'm Inga Werner. I have no new declarations. Thank you. Brief overview of the agenda. Today we will discuss current reviews and activities, and we will debrief on the Emerging Climate Science Symposium that took place in September. Are there any public comments at this point?
There are none.
Right. So agenda item 2 is the Delta ISB Chair's report and business matters. So I'm happy to report that we have new members, 3 new members of the board. At the July 24th, 2025 meeting, the Delta Stewardship Council unanimously appointed Dr. Peter Goodwin, Dr. Kathleen Jones, and Dr. Steve Lindley to 5-year terms on the Delta Independent Science Board. Dr. Jones and Dr. Lindley started their terms on September 1st, while Dr. Goodwin started on October 1st. All were present at the Emerging Climate Science Symposium, sorry. I did not meet them in person, unfortunately, at that point. I would now like to formally welcome the new members. Welcome. And just mention that Dr. Goodwin will not participate in Delta ISB tasks until the end of the year. By then, he will be wrapping up his work on an ad hoc committee of the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, which is reviewing the monitoring, modeling, and other relevant scientific activities and initiatives that support the long-term operations of the Central Valley Project. In the meantime, I would like to give a chance to Dr. Jones and Dr. Lindley to introduce themselves and tell us about their background and interest in the Delta ISB. So who would like to start?
I can start.
Kathleen, all right, go, please.
I'm Kathleen Jones. I work at the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. My expertise is in physics. My formal training is in physics. I got a PhD from California Institute of Technology. And More recently, though, I've been working on remote sensing, in particular radar remote sensing, looking at different Earth processes from satellites and from aircraft. I became interested in the Delta when I first started using this airborne instrument to look at subsidence in the Delta, and I became very fascinated with the region and the importance of the region, and that's why I applied to be on this board. My expertise is in remote sensing of ground phenomenon in general, surface subsidence from different processes like groundwater extraction or compaction, looking at coastal resilience from different processes like erosion, those kinds of things. And also I am involved in looking at oil pollution and how you can identify thicker oil on the ocean surface during spills.
Oh, thank you very much, Kathleen. Steve?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Really thrilled to be here today. I'm Steve Lindley. My background is in biological oceanography, and I've had a lot of broad interests in aquatic ecology at large, in the ocean, estuaries, rivers, etc. I joined the National Marine Fisheries Service in 1996 and worked my way through the ranks there, studying various aspects of anadromous fish ecology, becoming the director of the Southwest Fisheries Science Center lab in Santa Cruz, where I oversaw a broad portfolio of research that ranged from social science through genetics, stock assessment, and all kinds of fish ecology and even some climate science. My own interests the last 15 years or so really have kind of been around developing tools to integrate all of that information into decision support systems to help people understand the trade-offs between water use and anadromous fish persistence fundamentally. So that's obviously, one of the core issues among many others, which I am really excited to learn more about in the Delta. So I retired from NOAA Fisheries in April, along with a lot of other people, for reasons you can probably suspect. And I'm really excited to be able to keep, in the game a little bit, and hopefully for a more functional organization than the federal government is at the moment. So I'm very thankful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Well, we're thrilled to have you both in our group, and look forward to working with you for at least 5 years. So
Thank you.
thank you. All right, so let's move on. I'd like to tell you what's going on with the Delta ISB postdoc update. The Delta Stewardship Council's contract with California Sea Grant to administer a Delta ISB postdoctoral scholar and subject matter experts that support our reviews was executed in June 2025. Sea Grant is now in the process of recruiting a postdoctoral scholar, and the job posting was made available in July, end of July. We received over 31 applications and interviewed 6 applicants. There were many strong candidates, each bringing unique strengths and qualifications to the table. We will have a decision soon, or should have a decision soon, and expect the postdoctoral scholar to start in early 2026. Other staffing changes are that Dr. Dylan Chappell, the supervisor of the ISB support staff, will be on extended leave until the end of January. During that time, Henry DeBay, Chief Deputy Executive Officer for Science, will supervise ISB support staff. That's the staffing changes. And then we had a legislative briefing, which was coordinated with Stephanie Mitchell, Senior Consultant to the Assembly Water, Parks, and Wildlife Committee. It was a briefing for legislative staff to inform on the Delta ISB, and it took place virtually on August 22nd, attended by 10 legislative staff members. Dr. Lisa Wanger provided an overview of our current activities, including the Emerging Climate Science Symposium. In return, hopefully as a consequence of that, we had 2 legislative staff attend online and 3 legislative staff attend in person at the Emerging Climate Science Symposium. So that was great. I'd like to turn over to Lisa to report out and let us know about her thoughts about the briefing. Lisa, do you like
Thank
to
you,
say a few
Inga.
words?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, we had a nice turnout, a really engaged group. I gave them a quick explanation of both the Delta and the board, just not to assume background knowledge. And I emphasized how projects that we've completed, and how they've been used. Like, one example being how the IEP is taking up some of the food web recommendations. We also discussed our review of the Delta Conveyance project because we knew from pre-conversations that they were interested in that. But really, we emphasized how we focus on the adequacy of the science, and we're not advocates for any particular position. So for that, I mentioned our concern with climate change and also how social impacts were handled in the NEPA document, or sorry, the CEQA document. I discussed our current reviews, subsidence, decision-making under deep uncertainty, and the contaminants monitoring, and they had some good questions about those. I think what was really nice, though, is we learned some things from them. So we used a Mentimeter to draw information out of them. And I learned, I think, 2 important things. First, they have limited time for scientific investigation. They often get their information from advocates and Google searches. So I think that really is a takeaway for us to try to make our products more accessible to them, more concise, I think, is probably key. They also mentioned Maven's Notebook, which we already use to describe some of what we're doing. So that's a good route where we can pass information along to the legislature. And then we also asked them about scientific topics of interest, and they've reinforced some of the ideas that we've been discussing, such as invasive species, seismic risk, and restoration associated with the voluntary agreements, or as they're now called, the support of healthy rivers and landscapes. So I think we probably want to take that under advisement as we're thinking about our new reviews moving forward. So that's all I have. Thanks, Inga.
Oh, thanks a lot, Lisa. That was great. All right, so I have a few ISB review updates next. On the subsidence review, I'll give a little bit of background first for those who haven't heard it before. Since the departure of Dr. Holzer, staff have been working with Dr. McKnight and Dr. Heikkila to revise the public draft to better acknowledge the work that is being done in the region. A new highlight is that we have a map capturing where flux towers and subsidence reversal projects are located, along with the acreage of rice farming. A draft report was released during the week of October 13th for public comments. So yay. Comments are due on September 1st, 2025, and please submit any comments that you might have by this date as well. We will have a discussion on the draft at the November ISB meeting. Regarding the adaptive monitoring manuscript, Margot Matson and other staff are working with Dr. Dale to turn our recommendations from the 2022 monitoring review on adaptive monitoring into a perspective piece to be submitted to the journal Ecological Indicators. Comments from former and current board members are currently being addressed. A revised draft should be available soon. And then there is the review on decision-making under deep uncertainty. This review covers scientific tools and concepts that can increase the capacity to anticipate and adapt to growing uncertainty of future conditions in the Bay Delta system. The first product was a synthesis on what is DMDU based on, and what was learned through a seminar series. This was published in October 2024. The second product is a manuscript that was based on the inventory and analysis of scenario planning led by Dr. Joaquin Delta of the Delta Science Program, who is part of the Delta ISB staff support team. It was submitted to the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Sciences for a special issue on post-normal decision-making. Reviewer comments have been received and review leads are working with Dr. Shinbro to address them. A major comment was that it should be defined when it is appropriate or inappropriate to examine deeply uncertain futures. And another major comment asked how to conceptualize participation and cognitive biases. A revised draft will be submitted in November is the plan. So everything's moving forward, wonderful. And since the last meeting, we received some public correspondence. One from California Water Research, a brief on recent research on atmospheric rivers. From Tom Zuckerman, it just says subject Davis Symposium. I assume that's the climate science symposium. From Janice Cook of the Central Valley Water Quality Control Board, she wanted to share a press release from Sacramento Regional Sewer District highlighting the Delta's critical role while showcasing the important work of the Delta Regional Monitoring Program and pointing to the latest video sharing how its partnership is working collectively to protect this vital resource. Another one from California Water Research on a talk, a failure of CMIP6 models to capture decadal scale variability in the Pacific, and from Bob Wright, who provided a copy of letters submitted to the Delta Stewardship Council on the Delta Conveyance Project, a letter from Delta Public Agencies, and a letter from the Sierra Club. Are there any public comments?
There are none.
All right. And we move on to agenda item 3. I welcome Julie Lee, Delta Stewardship Council Chair, and for the Chair and Executive Officer report. Julie, I hand over to you now.
Thanks, Inga. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome the new ISB members as well. Excited to have you on the ISB. You're joining a team of really talented and exceptional people, in my opinion. I'm always super impressed by the conversations that I hear at the ISB meetings and the work products that come out and the information that they provide to the council. So welcome aboard. First of all, I'll start off with an update about the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. On September 16th, the State Water Resources Control Board rescinded the revised draft of the Sacramento Delta updates to the Water Quality Control Plan for the San Francisco Bay, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta watershed that was released in July and canceled their hearings. The board is working to complete another update, and the board staff anticipate a limited recirculation of the draft staff report / substitute environmental document in support of the Sacramento Delta updates to the Bay Delta plan, together with the updated draft plan in December of 2025. So we'll look forward to seeing that. We have a couple of new governor appointments on the council. Gavin Newsom appointed Ann Patterson to the Delta Stewardship Council effective September 24th, and Audrey Cho as our new legislative and policy advisor, replacing Brandon Chapin, who many of you may remember from his ledge updates that he's given to you. And her appointment was effective October 2nd. Audrey's been the executive fellow at the council since 2024 and has presented legislative updates to you as well. And she is just a delightful person. I'm really looking forward to working with Ann Patterson as well. She's been with the governor's office basically since the beginning and has served multiple roles since 2019, including as the governor's cabinet secretary and legal affairs secretary. Her position on the council was last occupied by Judge Frank Damrell. Many of you know, we affectionately refer to him as the judge. His leadership on the council resulted in the successful defense of the state's first ever Delta plan, and his commitment to centering undeserved communities shaped the council's recently adopted tribal and environmental justice issue paper. So we know that his work on the council will be lasting, and he was appointed to the California Alcohol Beverage Control Appeals Board by Governor Newsom on September 15th, 2025. So he continues his public service, and we wish him the best. Next, the Delta Protection Commission appointed Amanda Bowl as its next executive director. As many of you know, Amanda served on the executive management team at the council, where she was our special assistant for planning and science. Since 2018, she coordinated the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, affectionately referred to as DPIC, which fosters cooperation and communication among the 18 state and federal agencies, including the Delta Protection Commission, which is involved in the Delta Plan. So we look forward to continuing to work with Amanda in her new capacity as the executive director. Next, I wanted to highlight a legislative update for you, which is that Senate Bill 650, authored by Senator Christopher Cabaldon, was signed into law by the governor on October 3rd. The bill amends the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Reform Act of 2009, and the key provisions are that it prioritizes continuity by making the provisions of the Delta Plan severable. That is, if one part of the plan is held to be invalid, the rest would remain in effect. The bill also creates a greater certainty on legal timelines, setting a clear 90-day statute of limitation for legal challenges related to changes to the Delta Plan or the council's appeals procedures, or the council's determination on appeals regarding the consistency of specified projects, which we call covered actions, with the Delta Plan. It also explicitly defines state and local public agencies as authorized participants in the council's appeal process. Next, we have a couple of certificates of consistency that have been filed. On October 3rd, the California Department of Water Resources released a notice of intent to submit a certification of consistency for the Delta Conveyance Project. And then on the 17th, they actually filed it, the certification that the Delta Conveyance Project is consistent with the Delta Plan. On October 8th, the Brannon-Andrus Levee Maintenance District filed a certification of consistency that the Georgiana Slough Erosion Control and Habitat Enhancement Project. Looking forward to having those two issues before us soon. The next step would be if anyone wants to file an appeal. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the appeal process. Anyone who claims that the covered actions are inconsistent with the Delta Plan, and as a result of that inconsistency, that action will have a significant adverse impact on the achievement of one or both of the co-equal goals of the Delta Reform Act, or implementation of government-sponsored flood control programs to reduce risks to people and property in the Delta, may file an appeal with regard to these certifications of consistency no later than 30 calendar days after the dates of submittal. And then that kicks off a hearing process for us if any appeals are filed. Next, I wanted to share some information about our public participation plan. The council's public participation plan is fundamental to the council's efforts to achieve the co-equal goals, which are a more reliable statewide water supply and a resilient Delta ecosystem in a manner that protects and enhances the unique characteristics of the Delta as an evolving place where people live, work, and recreate. We're in the process of updating our public participation plan, which also includes the public participation process for the Delta ISB. We recently conducted a survey to get feedback from the public, which closed on October 13th. Our goal is to ensure that the engagement process is open, inclusive, and accessible to everyone. We'll provide updates, including survey results, at a future ISB meeting. I have an update on the Delta Science Plan as well. Over the past few years, the Delta Science Program has been working to update the 2019 Delta Science Plan, a shared framework that provides vision, principles, and approaches for conducting and coordinating science in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta to more effectively communicate the outcomes of science activities and their management implications to policymakers. Throughout the process, staff have updated the Delta ISB, and you've had the chance to provide some informal feedback, which we greatly appreciate. The Delta Science Program hopes to release the draft science plan before your November 12th virtual meeting and would like to request a formal review. They will be available to present at your November 12th meeting and answer any questions that you might have. I wanted to mention some updates on our climate initiatives. First off, thank you for hosting a great Emerging Climate Science Symposium in September. Many of our council staff were in attendance, including Executive Officer Jessica Pearson and our Chief Deputy Executive Officer Ryan Stanborough. As you learned during the Emerging Climate Science Symposium, the state of California is preparing its 5th climate change assessment, which will contribute to the scientific foundation for understanding climate-related vulnerability throughout California. It will support on-the-ground implementation and decision-making at the local, regional, tribal, and state levels, focusing on the needs of communities most vulnerable to climate change impacts. We have an opportunity to prepare a state-led report, so the council is leading one for the Delta with contributions from the Delta Protection Commission and the Delta Conservancy. Council staff are using the information learned from the Emerging Climate Science Symposium and incorporating it into this report. We look forward to your discussion later today on your reflections on the Science Symposium and the presentation tomorrow at our council meeting. So we'll see you there, Inga. And I think Obey as well will be there. Wonderful. And my last update is that in the Delta ISB's 2016 review on adaptive management, you called for regular adaptive management forums to promote coordination and learning and to foster discussions about implementing adaptive management in the Delta. The Council's Delta Science Program hosted its first adaptive management forum in 2019 and has continued to do so, hosting its 4th forum last week on October 14th and 15th. The second day of the forum was a field trip out to Lookout Slough, which is a restoration project, and I was able to go on that. The last time that I saw that restoration project was last year, in 2024, when they breached the levee and flooded the 3,400 acres. And so it was just mud and there wasn't much to see. We were on the water side of things. And when we came back this year, it was stunning. It was absolutely gorgeous. It looks like it's been there for, in my opinion, decades. I'm not a scientist, but the plants are thriving. They're green. They're huge. There's wildlife. It was really amazing to see the transformation that took place over there. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Huang of the Council's Delta Science Program to provide a brief report on that forum and give you some more information about it.
Thanks, Julie. As you mentioned, last week, the Delta Stewardship Council hosted the 2025 Adaptive Management Forum. The planning of the forum was led by Dr. Stephen Elser and the Adaptive Management Unit. And just a little bit more background on the forum. It's a biannual event with the goal of increasing the capacity of implementing adaptive management in the Delta through enhanced learning, collaboration, and knowledge sharing. The focus of this year's forum was around the idea of progress, and the results and lessons learned will be integrated into an adaptive management report that is expected to come out sometime in 2026. This report will highlight examples of success, barriers, and opportunities to implement adaptive management in the Delta. And it will serve as a follow-up to the to the ISB's 2026 review and review on adaptive management by highlighting practical examples of projected projects implementing adaptive management into their management plan. We know that adaptive management is happening in the Delta, but it's not always coordinated. There's not always coordinated communications around the projects. And so this report will serve as an opportunity to highlight and communicate progress of adaptive management in the Delta itself. As Julie mentioned at the beginning, this year's forum was a two-day event. The first day consisted of presentations here at CNRA in Sacramento. We had keynote speaker from Dr. Kerrigan Bork, who is the director of the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis. And he, in his presentation, highlighted examples of what it looks like to be proactive and implement management triggers during the planning phase to avoid regulatory hurdles later down the road. And we also had 3 panels highlighting different topics, one on emerging tools in the face of accelerating change, another on leadership's perspectives on adaptive management in the Delta, and the last panel, which is titled Headlines from the Future, where panelists envision a positive outlook for the Delta down the road in 2050, and they outline steps that we need to take currently to achieve that vision. There were also 7 presentations from practitioners in the Delta explaining how adaptive management applies to their current projects and what it looks like. Stacy Sherman of CDFW, California Department of Wildlife, described adaptive management as not a wheel, but as a roller coaster. And we also have activities to end the first day of the Adaptive Management Forum. We had a gallery walk and a poster session to increase networking opportunities and to capture success, barriers, and opportunities of adaptive management from the audience. And the audience included a diverse array of participants, including state agencies, community-based organizations, and academic institutions, but we were notably missing our federal partners due to the government shutdown. And the second day of the forum, as Julie mentioned as well, it was a field trip to Lookout Slough. Lookout Slough is one of the largest tidal wetlands restoration projects in California. The slough was a public-private partnership by a Department of Water Resources and Ecosystem Investment Partners. Speakers working on the project from the planning to the current monitoring phase spoke about their work, the challenges, and their iterative process to get this project where it is now. The attendees also saw a demonstration of field gear used for monitoring various taxa at Lookout Slough and similar sites. And this demonstration was led by Stacey Sherman of California Department of Fish and Wildlife of the Fish Restoration Project titled Wetlands Monitoring Project. And on this slide, you can see pictures of Lookout Slough, what it looks like as of the forum last week. And we have a really good turnout, about 30 people on the second day. And then on the bottom right corner, you can see a demonstration of the field work that they're planning to use for the area, for monitoring. And that's it.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you very much, Julie, for the report. I was able to participate in a forum on the first day, and I thought it was truly inspiring and well put together. It was great, and I'm not going to get into all my notes, but I also thought of Lisa because in the leadership perspective section, there was a call for decisions that have to be made even if there's scientific uncertainty. And I thought that was a perfect connection to the decision-making under deep uncertainty work that she and others have been doing on the board. I also thought the last section was really creative, where they had some panel members design a headline and an article in 2050 about the Delta, and all those visions were pretty positive, I have to say, and, which is nice. But it was a really nice exercise because then you can discuss the vision and the way to get there as well. I thought it was really creative. And a little fun fact that was mentioned by Dylan, the adaptive management wheel was seen 67 times on presenter slides. So I think it's entering people's brains for sure. So that was great. I also wanted to respond to Julie's announcement of asking for a formal review of the draft Delta Science Plan. So Dr. Diane McKnight has indicated that she is interested in co-leading the review. And would anybody else on the board would like to co-lead? If you do, if you have to think about it for a while, you can let staff know after the meeting if you're interested in co-leading that review. So thank you very much, both of you. Are there public comments at this point?
There were none.
All right, so our next agenda item 4, is a discussion of the Climate Science Research Symposium. And I'll just give a little bit of background and then hand over to Obi. The Delta ISB hosted a hybrid symposium as part of its public meeting from September 16th to 17th. At UC Davis that brought together over 250 scientists, practitioners, and decision makers to assess the latest climate science and its implications for the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. The Delta ISB will now reflect on what was learned from the symposium and will discuss products coming out of the symposium. Obi, I hand over to you.
Yeah, can we get this first slide, Edmund? I think we can go to slide number 4, maybe. Okay. We don't need to cover this. Oh yeah, from here we can start, I think. Is that okay, Inga?
Yeah.
Can you all hear me okay? Good
Yes.
afternoon. Yeah, so I'll give you a brief summary of the symposium. I think as Inga mentioned, and also Julie mentioned, it was a great event. It took a while for us to organize this. And I appreciate the help from my colleagues on the board, Dr. Anna Michalak and also Dr. Lisa Ranger. And also I should mention the excellent support from the staff, Edmund and Jonathan, we received to organize that, facilitate the symposium. It occurred from on September 16th, 17th at UC Davis. As Inga mentioned, we had quite a large attendance, 250 across 2 days, which was quite good. And perhaps there were equal virtual attendees and in-person attendees. So when we set out this symposium, there were 2 purposes. One was to, and as we know, the climate science is evolving rapidly. You know, every year we see something new. So the board needed to understand the current projections and the science for the region, and more importantly, understand the uncertainties of these projections. The second purpose of this symposium was to see how the current state of science in climate is being integrated into decision making in the Delta, particularly planning and operations. So those were the 2 primary objectives. Next slide, please. Okay, so I realized, we learned a lot during the symposium, and we had some excellent speakers who have worked in the Delta for decades, some of them, and some new ones who have done some recent emerging science on climate drivers and impacts and hazards. So we put together this slide to kind of summarize what the key takeaways from that discussion. And some of these have been known for some time, but I thought it would be useful for us to put it all in one place and see what we are looking for in terms of the future. So in terms of warming trend, that obviously the primary stressor in the changing climate. And we know since the pre-industrial days, globally, there have been 1.3 to 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. But I think that the projections are that on the current path, we might actually reach 3 degrees Celsius by 2100 or higher. And I think the science information showed us that the California has warmed rapidly since about 1980s, more so inland than on the coast. The second bullet there, it's very important that there is an accelerating sort of nonlinear atmospheric and hydrologic response to warming. It's basically a disproportionate increase in the impacts of warming, and I'll get to it in the next bullet. A primary point here is that the warmer atmosphere can hold larger amount of moisture, and basically the estimates are like 7% per degree Celsius. And this could have significant impact on precipitation rate, particularly at sub-daily duration. So there could be rain intensification happening. So that's in terms of warming trend impacts. And I'm not talking about other ecological impacts and others. I think they were kind of mentioned during the symposium. We were primarily focusing on stresses and hazards. The second major category there is intensifying hydroclimate variability. We realize that the storms may be fewer but more intense and clustered, particularly the atmospheric rivers. And these are very important phenomenon in the Bay Delta region, as we all know, in terms of flooding, and not having them may lead to water shortages sometimes. We also learned that there's more severe droughts due to higher evaporative demand. Basically, the idea is that you have a warmer atmosphere, there's more losses from the land surface into the atmosphere, and this can interact with the warming itself and then lead to higher water losses and lead to more longer and persistent droughts. Something that's very interesting is this, what we call hydroclimate whiplash. In other words, the floods followed by a drought, and this could happen very frequently in the future. And I read somewhere that in 1862, they had a very large flood due to series of atmospheric rivers followed by a drought. So this is the kind of whiplash events that we might see more often in the future. On the right-hand column, we see there is significant impact on snowpack and runoff, changes in runoff timing and magnitude due to less snow and more rain. In other words, the rain is basically going into the snow season, and you will have rain on snow, which might lead to flashier floods or flashier runoff. And the other impact is like we may have less snowpack, which is our natural storage. We may also have more intense wildfires leading to increased runoff because of the changes in the upper watersheds, and that will also have impact on water quality in terms of sediment count into the rivers. Finally, something we have already known for some time is the accelerating sea level rise. The local and regional sea level may exceed the current high-end estimate, particularly if the ice sheet melt are going to be accelerating in the future due to warming in the decades to come. And obviously, the higher sea level will increase the stress on the levees, and induce more saltwater intrusion and flood exposure, particularly in conjunction with subsidence. You'll have a bigger stress on the levee. So this, at a high level, this gives us a complete picture of what is to be expected. And what we learned was that the middle of the ground, or there is no such thing as average much anymore, that it's disappearing. The California is facing a future that is more volatile and includes more extremes. Now, despite uncertainties, we know enough to say that the science clearly indicates hotter, drier climate punctuated by intense wet events. So given all this, we need to be flexible in our planning and management, and use risk-informed management, focusing on variability and extremes as the future pathways. And we'll get to it later on. Next slide, please. So we also wanted to know, I mean, we have known some of this for some time. We wanted to know what are the scientific advances that we have seen in the last 5 to 10 years. So now we have listed some of them here. One is improved subseasonal forecasting. In other words, we have better ability to forecast what could happen in the next 2 or 3 weeks, which could be very important for real-time operations. So that was a new science that we have learned in the recent past. We also have a better understanding of rare events, particularly atmospheric rivers. We may have less of them, but those that are happening may be more stronger and may result in larger amounts of precipitation, particularly in interaction with the warmer atmosphere. The recognition of flash droughts, I think, was another recent finding, particularly this concept of hydroclimate whiplash. And more importantly, with that, droughts followed by a flood. And again, with a wildfire, you could have significant changes in the response of the watershed. The fourth one, the enhanced climate reliability and assessment. So we have better climate models, and we have better understanding of what could happen in the future. A real question might be, are we incorporating those into sort of the practice in reality? And we also heard a talk on potential benefit of using AI in forecasting runoff in particular. And finally, we know a lot about the timing of transmission from low to no snow conditions. In other words, the finding is that the no snow conditions could happen 20 years earlier by mid-century in some parts of the region. So I think we have better understanding of that as well. Next slide. So there were some additional concerns, this whole issue of the ocean temperature regimes or phenomena like Pacific Decadal Oscillation or El Nino, La Nina phenomena, how they impact the hydrologic regime in the Bay Delta region. I think there's a connection, particularly in El Nino situations. You could have wetter and possibly warmer conditions, but the finding is that there is some uncertainty. We expected, based on climate models, more El Nino to occur, but there's an observation we might be having more La Nina type conditions. And I think there have been some papers on explaining that. I think there is some uncertainty in there that needs to be looked at. The second point there is we have dynamic versus thermodynamic precipitation changes. Let me explain this. The thermodynamic changes is what I mentioned earlier. You have 77% increase per degree, but within the storms itself, there could be dynamic effect that may be intensifying rainfall more in particular storms. So I think that is another uncertainty. What is that dynamic effect besides the thermodynamic effect on precipitation? The rare drought recurrence potential might increase. In other words, we may have more situations like 1862 drought or earlier in the future, more frequency and higher probability of them happening in the future. We need to have a better understanding of infrastructure vulnerability, particularly due to compounding effects of all these hazards happening together. I think one example is if there's a seismic event and if you have some atmospheric river, for example, event or some other hazard, what is the compounding effects of those? And finally, the ecosystem tipping points, what it means that the climate by the mid-century may be such that if there's a forest fire, the forest may disappear, but some other kind of vegetation might appear, basically changing the hydrologic response of the watershed. Next slide, please. So what are the adaptation strategies? Fortunately, there are some of these that are being implemented already. But in particular, the nature-based solutions could be a good solution. In particular, the headwater restoration was mentioned during the symposium. Upstream of the reservoirs, maybe there are some things that we could do to basically retain that excess runoff that's coming. On the technology integration, there are already a couple of ideas in practice. What known as forecast informed reservoir operations. Now that we may have a better way to forecast those 2 to 3 week runoff regimes, I think that is a good early warning system that is in place, and we should be looking for more of these types of operational practices. The multi-benefit approaches, the best example of that is the flood manage aquifer recharge, combining flood waters with the groundwater. I think this is an excellent example of what could be done now and in the future. And finally, the adaptive management. Because of this uncertainty and in the extremes, we need to be flexible in planning and operations and regularly updating these operational regimes and identifying trigger points. Next slide, please. So there were 5 breakout groups during the symposium. I think I want to thank again, Edmund and Jonathan for facilitating that. They did a great job structuring this. We are still trying to understand the feedback from the participants who provided excellent input as to what needs to be considered in the future. I think there are 4 of these we have identified here. Expand monitoring networks, especially for vertical land motion. With sea level rise and the land subsidence, we need to have better estimates of those so we understand the stresses on the levee system, for example. Develop more scenario-based planning exercises. When you have extremes that could be uncertain, scenario-based approaches could be helpful in understanding and developing operational strategies for future management. Focus on win-win interventions, beneficial even without climate change. Probably flood MA is a good example of that. And then I think, as I mentioned, this idea of maybe upstream watershed management could be a way to deal with that some of the changes in runoff regimes that we are going to be seeing in the future. Next slide, please. So what more should be done? I think this phrase I heard, manage floods to get through drought, this whole idea of hydroclimate whiplash, consider the extremes, not rely on averages. I think that was a key message that came through and I think needs to be focused on in the future. Greater community engagement and co-production. We realize that not all communities have equal capacity. And I think by producing solutions together, particularly, for example, tribes, we could be more efficient in our approaches for dealing with climate change in the future. Improve cross-agency coordination. I think that was another thing that came out. Basically, again, not all agencies have the same capacity. I think maybe the modeling collaboratory is a good example of that. And I think that is something that we should promote more in the future. Finally, more integration of compound risks, and perhaps we need to do more in terms of what are the climatic hazards. When you have in tandem with seismic subsidence, hydroclimate whiplash, how do we plan these projects and manage, develop operational strategies? So we need more integrated assessment. And finally, the tools need to have an end user focus. Sometimes they might be too technical. I think we need to come up with some better ways of producing outputs or outcomes that all stakeholders can understand when they use the tools. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps? On the left-hand side, we are presenting this tomorrow, I believe, to Delta Stewardship Council, a very brief presentation, pretty much along the same lines of what we are talking about. On October 27th, California Natural Resources Agency Secretary Speaker Series, we will present that on the 27th. The State of Estuary Conference, INGA, will present this a summary of the symposium on October 28th. On terms of product, we are hoping to produce a memo with key highlights and what was learned from the symposium, and write a proceedings report. And finally, we will be developing a perspective piece for peer review publication. I think, I believe there's probably enough for us to write a perspective piece. I think that's the last slide. And I encourage others in our team to contribute, or we'll be happy to respond to any questions or have a discussion.
All right. Thank you very much, Obi. I'll keep handing over to you to lead the discussion here on these debrief questions and invite the board to share their thoughts, please.
Yeah. Do you want to go to the? I think Anna and Lisa have hands raised. Do you want to go to them first, or?
No, go for it. You have.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Anna and Lisa. You may have something you want to add.
Yeah, thank you, Obe. I think that was a great summary, and I just want to echo what you said, that it was an incredibly successful symposium. I was really pleased, not just by the number of participants, but also by the broad range of types of expertise and types of institutions that the participants came from. I think we learned a tremendous amount about the state of the science. As you said, I think we learned a lot also about some of the difficulties associated with integrating that state of the science into decision making in a meaningful way. And I think a lot of those challenges we knew about already, but some of the panels and some of the components of the discussions that I enjoyed the most was really when we drilled into exactly where that handoff from, for example, climate scientists to, for example, DWR or the Delta Stewardship Council would need to take place, or to water management agencies, and what that gap is, and ideas on how to bridge that gap in ways that would make that process of having management reflect the most up-to-date science much more effective and efficient in the future. Those were some of the things that stood out to me. I also want to say that the venue was incredibly conducive to really great discussions. I think that people really, even during the breaks and during the breakouts, spent a lot of time having really deep, meaningful discussions, and I think those really contributed to the success of the symposium overall. And I think I'll pass things on to Lisa.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. Yes, great summary. And I think Anna basically said a lot of what I was going to say. So great minds think alike. So that's good. I will just say that I appreciated how enthusiastic and widespread the interest in this was. I do think that's great to see that folks know this is a coming challenge and are looking for ways to manage it, manage the risks. I also kind of homed in on the same issue of I think a next step will be that we need maybe more discussion around that handoff, as Anna said it, or kind of the institutional capacity to absorb this information and actually integrate it in their decision processes. I think we started to touch on that topic, and I think that's somewhere where we can go deeper in future conversations. But a really nice thing that I think happened that was unanticipated was I heard from folks at institutions other than DWR who were saying how nice it was to get a chance to talk the agencies, one-to-one, scientists at these agencies one-to-one, that even though it's not that they don't do it at all, but they appreciate having another opportunity. And I was glad that we could provide that.
Thank you, Lisa. I wanted to add something. One thing we learned about the fifth climate assessment, and I know one of the issues was different agencies may have different data sets or information on future climate projects, and DWR may have better capacity to deal with, very large climate data set. But having this fifth climate assessment, the database from that effort, I think that was mentioned earlier by Julie. I think that would be a great resource to have a unified set of data that all agencies and stakeholders will use. I think that'll be a wonderful benefit of that effort in the future. I see there are deeply questions, and I invite all the ISB members to comment. And I see Tanya first, and then Kathleen.
Yeah, thanks, Obey. Not to repeat too much of what Anna and Lisa just said, but it was also just noteworthy to me how much interest there was in really thinking about this puzzle of how do we get the science to inform management and decision making. And I would just encourage us as we think about how we bring that question into whatever report or review products that come out of this, that we think about integrating some of the social science around that. There's really good social science out there around how science can inform decision making, and I mean we're already doing that with, of course, with the DMDU review, but there's other resources out there that we could draw upon that I think could be beneficial for helping us just think about how we make recommendations or think about those next steps. So
yeah. Thank you, Tanya. Good point. Kathleen, you're next.
Yeah, I wanted to say I really appreciate your summary. I think it caught almost all the points that I was going to bring up in this debrief. There are a few things, though, that I'd like to emphasize. One is that it really struck me that the rate of change that's going to occur between now and 2050 is relatively minor compared to the real acceleration of change that's going to occur between 2050 and 2100. And so that means that there's a relatively short time frame for people to really begin to take actions. And that I think that that's something that struck me whenever I looked at the graphs that people had of the expected changes. I think that's really important. The other thing is a lot of the adaptation plans seem focus on dealing with runoff and atmospheric rivers and all of those things that are going to be really much more extreme in the future and much more punctuated, shorter term, but higher intensity, more variable. But that sea level rise is a different thing. It's coming from the ocean side, not from the land side. And those adaptation plans deal with the land side inflow of water into the delta. And so I was looking at the sea level rise, and okay, you're not really at the ocean. So you could expect something like 50 centimeters of sea level rise in the delta and that's including things like king tides. And so I think that that's a number that we need to keep in mind whenever we think about what's going to happen with the rise in water that's coming from the ocean side.
Thank you, Kathleen. Good points. And I might incorporate your rate of change comment into the council briefing tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or whenever. Steve, you're next.
Thank you, Obe. You did a great job, I think, summarizing much of the things I took away from the really wonderful meeting as well. I just want to dig in a little bit on one thing that came up that you mentioned. It was in Daniel Swain's presentation about a recent paper that came out of Nature a couple months ago about the discrepancy in the Pacific Decadal oscillation, its observations, and what the climate models are saying should be happening there. And I think this is it's a really interesting and important paper that I think the takeaway may be that we don't have as much time as we thought we might have. I'd like to dig into this a little bit better. I have some colleagues that can help me with this as well, atmospheric scientists. But basically, the Pacific Ocean has been kept cooler than would be expected due to the aerosol emissions from Asia. And as those relax, which I think is already happening, the warming will accelerate, and the climate system is actually much more sensitive to anthropogenic forcing than it has been modeled. And if it would be helpful for the people leading this review, I'd be happy to write up a little bit about what I can dig up about the details of this.
Steve, that's a great idea if you can, because I think it'd be a great addition to our report. I think you're doing some follow-up research. I would welcome that, you write, talk to your friends and, write something about that. It seems like an important aspect of our report. Thank you. I don't see anybody else having.
I did have a couple other thoughts actually too.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I went too
that's
fast.
fine.
Take your time. Yeah.
That was the main one. I was also really fascinated by the mitigation strategies that people were talking about, and I'm wondering whether much could be gained from thinking about those in a more integrated way. You broke them out into 4 classes, FIRO being one of them. A lot of discussion was about that, and I've been following the FIRO work since they started on the Russian River there, and how that might link to this flood-mar concept and the other things I think that you mentioned, whether we can be doing a lot more there about thinking broader, the upper basin stuff as well. That seems like an important thing to dig into a little bit, because I think FIRO is going to get overwhelmed by this whiplash as well, that you're just not going to be able to do that much with reservoir storage, but maybe thinking about floodplains in an integrated fashion would be a good thing to do. And then we've been talking a little bit here about social science, and some of those things came up, but I think it was probably more thinking needs to be done there, not just about how to get this information to decision makers, but how to get people to buy into these actions. There was a little example there in the last panel of the guy who was the attorney and farmer, basically said he would fight to the death over a tunnel, which would be one strategy for building some resilience for floods in the Delta into the system. And I think that's just going to be a rampant thing, that any idea that people propose, it has winners and losers, and how do you get around the inevitable pushback that comes from that?
Good point. Anything else, Steve? Anything else, Steve? That's it? Okay.
Yep.
I don't see anybody else on the board having any comments or comment. Inga, do you have any comments? I see you raise your hand.
Yeah, I was going to be quiet because I was only able to participate for part of the symposium online. But what stuck with me is that some people really urged action and were expressed some frustration with, how slow the action is progressing. It would be, in my mind at least, it would be really neat to have a follow-up symposium at some point and focus on what we can do, what can be done now to mitigate the effects? And just following what Steve just said, it would be the Delta Conveyance Project. You know, it's not in people's minds. When I talk to friends and here in California, it's not on people's minds that that might be one of the benefits of the Delta Conveyance Project. They only talk about water allocation, but never about, you know, how sea level rise could threaten the existing system. So maybe there's a messaging problem there as well. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to build a little bit on Steve and Inga's comments. So obviously there's trade-offs to any choices made, and it's, I think the issue that both of them are bringing up is that it's no one's job necessarily to think at the full systems level. You know, people have responsibility for pieces of the system. So that does bring up an interesting topic of how we might help that coordination. And I'm probably wrong to say it's no one's job to think that way, but let's just say a lot of the agencies have their pieces to push forward. But I do think there's a combination of systems thinking and adaptive management could be useful here. So Steve mentioned thinking about the floodplains more systemically and the groundwater recharge. You know, the FloodMAR, while a fantastic idea and a great project, is only partially successful at getting water back in the ground. A lot of water is still ending up in the stream, which of course is good for the streams too. But I think I'm wondering whether combinations of approaches might be more effective at groundwater recharge, and are we fully exploring things like that? So I'm obviously these are questions we can't answer as a group, but perhaps there's some more detailed conversations that we could help facilitate. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Lisa. Kathleen?
Yeah, I wanted to say how much I appreciate the comment about, you know, the levees of stability in the conveyance project. The levees are extremely vulnerable, not just, you know, we all know that there's going to be a lot more water coming through the Delta some of the time, and there's going to be a lot more water not coming through the Delta whenever there are droughts. So there's going to be drying of that area, and there's going to be sustained hydrostatic pressure, higher hydrostatic pressure on the levees because of this roughly half meter of sea level rise that's going to occur in the Delta. All of this is going to, and this is at the same time as you are continually losing peat in the Delta. And that just leads to more sand boils, more stress, more problems with the Delta, and drought will only accelerate the loss of peat in the Delta. And this brings me to something that I was thinking about during the symposium, which is that these wetland restoration projects, anything that can promote wetting of the peat will slow down the subsidence in that area. And, you know, a lot of these projects, natural-based solutions, they're great, but they're small in area. Is there a way to think larger in area so that we prevent some of this subsidence that's going to just make the levees even more vulnerable than they already are?
Thank you, Kathleen. I think we have one comment from the attendees group here, but I wanted to make a follow-up comment on what many of you said. I think Kathleen said, you know, maybe by mid-century is when things might start deviate depending on the warming scenario, like, you know, but perhaps it'll be nice if you can think what are those win-win things that we can do between now and 2050, but at the same time, think along these adaptive pathway strategies that you are not preempted from doing something bigger later. This whole concept of dynamic adaptive pathway, something we probably should think about. I think there was a comment or suggestion the board should provide recommendations what could be done in the next 20, 30 years and beyond, right? So I think that's something I feel maybe we need to think about, not necessarily in this report, but maybe in a future discussion. But let me go to the attendees side. Gilbert Cosio, you have, I think, Edmund, do you want to take over this?
Yeah. So Gilbert, if you have a public question, you have the ability to unmute your microphone right now, and feel free to introduce yourself again for our new members.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you. This is Gilbert Cosio from River Delta Consulting. I've been working on levees for over 40 years, being a reclamation district engineer on about 46 different islands in the Delta over the years. I want to make a couple of comments about sea level rise and levees because we have studied that a lot. Back about 15 years ago, we had some extra money on a grant that we actually calculated what it would take, designed what it would take to stay consistent with sea level rise and keep the levee stable. And then also, there's a limit to where subsidence will affect a levee. Because even in the CalFed days, or before CalFed, back in the 70s, the Corps of Engineers DWR studied it quite a bit, and they found there was an effective area about 400 feet from the levee. After that, subsidence and that sort of thing doesn't affect a levee. If you look at the geotechnical stratigraphy or the soils, you see that you've got very weak soils after you get past the top fill through the foundation, that sort of thing. But then when you get to the bottom of those, what they call marsh deposits, which are peats and loose sands, you get a very stiff sand. And so that's going to be the plane that you have your slip circles on every time you raise the forces on the levee. It doesn't change. The main thing is every time sea level goes up, you have to raise the levee and then widen the toe berm. The toe berms they designed in Bulletin 192 in 1982 kind of capture the effect of stabilizing that levee by putting weight on the back slope and on the toe of the levee. And so there is kind of a limit. And when the Delta Levees program was funded by SB 34 in 1988, they actually added a condition that would allow payments to reclamation districts that wanted to limit the agricultural activity within 400 feet of the levee, because that's where we need to stop subsidence. That's the area that affects the levee's strength. It's not, once you get inside that, it really doesn't affect it that much. And then a couple of other comments. As far as the tunnel, someone mentioned it could help with flood. The flood system on the Sacramento side is 600,000 cubic feet per second maximum. So 6,000 CFS is not going to help a flood coming off the Sacramento River. And then the saltwater intrusion. Yeah, right now we think of saltwater intrusion encroaching, from the west side to the central delta, and on and on and on. But in reality, if you look at the drought of 28 to 34, that saltwater came all the way to Sacramento. So we don't know what's going to happen, but potentially where these tunnel intakes are located, that could be inundated with salt also. So we don't know that yet, but that's another thing to be thinking about, that it's just not the levees that are going to keep the salt from coming on, and it might just come in naturally just because the distance we are from the source, the San Francisco Bay, is just too short. So anyway, that's all I have, but thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. I think that's all we have, right, Edmund?
Yes, no additional public comments.
Right. I don't see anybody else needing to talk, but I think I will hand this back to Inga.
All right. Well, thank you, Obi, and thanks everybody for your insights and comments. I hope I'm not muted. So I would say we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I would say we take a 15-minute break now and then move on to agenda item, I'm sorry, 6, I think. No. Agenda item 5, which is the contaminant monitoring review. So I'll report out on that. So I'll see you back in, let's say 10:40. That's 14 minutes. All right. Thank you. All right, well, welcome back after the break to our meeting. We're going to move on to agenda item 5 now, which is a discussion of the interview questions in phase 1 of the contaminant monitoring review. I'll provide some background first for those who haven't heard this before. The Delta ISB is currently working on a review to assess contaminant monitoring programs in the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. The goal is to identify strengths and areas of improvement in how the data provides the information needed by managers to make informed decisions regarding the ecological risk of contaminants. We will also review promising advanced and emerging methods and approaches that could potentially advance current monitoring programs. The prospectus for this was finalized at the end of July of this year, and we are now in the process of starting phase 1 of the review. This will consist of a series of interviews with experts involved in water quality regulation, contaminant monitoring, and risk assessment in the Delta. For example, representatives of water boards, wastewater treatment facilities, agricultural water quality coalitions, Delta and San Francisco Bay regional monitoring programs. We aim to understand an understanding of the regulatory landscape driving contaminants monitoring and the thresholds or triggers prompting management action. In addition, expert opinions will be obtained on approaches and design of current programs, how data are managed, synthesized, and communicated, and on key gaps and barriers that may exist. We have been working on the interview questions and are in the process of scheduling the first round of interviews. A copy can be found in your meeting package. The interviews will occur in the fall and into the first part of next year. So I hope you had a chance to look at those questions and invite you to comment, add, criticize, anything you'd like. So the members of the Delta board, please let me know if you'd like to comment on those. Oh, I can also go through, yes. So the introduction clearly, we are explaining what we're trying to do with current review, and the prospectus is, of course, the basis for that. We are the general questions on what they are involved in, which regulatory requirements and laws apply to their work, which contaminant programs are they involved. Not all of these apply to everybody because clearly we know the background of the people we're interviewing. And what are the current sources of funding, which is always an important driving force. So then the next question relates to review goal 1A, which is assess current information gaps in current monitoring, and do you see any ways to improve contaminant monitoring? 1B would be, how can the data provide the information needed by managers to make informed decisions regarding the ecological risk of contaminants? And the corresponding questions are, how does your agency use contaminant monitoring data? Obviously only applies to agency folks. What management decisions or regulations are informed by the data? Do you think that the monitoring data you work with or have access to is adequate to satisfy the regulatory requirements? And do you think that the monitoring data you work with or have access to is adequately informing decisions about ecological risk of contaminants? Goal number 2 is understand how monitoring informs decision-making, i.e. how monitoring data are used in designing and taking management actions. So the corresponding questions there are there additional data needs that will inform management decisions? What challenges do you see for decision makers to effectively use monitoring data for taking management actions on contaminants in the Delta? Then goal number 3 is review promising advanced and emerging methods and approaches that are candidates for advancing the current monitoring programs. And here we seek input on what promising or emerging methods they consider worth examining, and if they have suggestions regarding the methodology applied to contaminant monitoring and/or risk assessment. So clearly these questions are fairly general at this point. Then for conclusions, we will always ask who else should we interview. We already got, a lot of suggestions for interviewees from the comment letters on the prospectus earlier this year. And we added all those names to our list of interviewees. So I'm sure there will be some sort of a snowball effect down the road where we will contact other people as well. That's a brief overview. Let me know if you have comments. Don't see any raised hands.
There are actually, Inga. Diane and I.
Oh yeah, I don't see it. Okay, you have one, and for some reason I don't see them.
Okay, I can call on folks. Go ahead, Diane.
Yes, appreciate the list of questions. I would say, from my experience being involved in interviews with the both the food web study and the study of subsidence, having a priority questions, because people will talk. And you might want to be sure to be able to get through the whole list. And some of the questions towards the end are really important. So, and people will only be there for a short time. So that's a strategy issue to consider. But then there could be follow-up interviews if needed. The other point I would have is the time element isn't specifically called out here. Sometimes, as you know, samples will be collected and be analyzed for contaminants, and the data are available after QA/QC 8 months later. And if a high concentration was discovered of a contaminant, there's not enough. It's all in the past by the time the news is released, and so it's retrospective. So how do you probing whether or not there's in terms of these in situ environmental monitoring and other approaches that may not have as rigorous a QA/QC, but were more timely, would seem to be one of the areas that could be explored, and getting feedback from the interviewees about those issues of timeliness might come up naturally with the questions as they exist now, but I think could be really useful.
Thank you, Diane, for those comments. I'll make a note of that and we'll put it in brackets so we don't forget about that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we can just self-call on each other. So I have my hand up next. Yeah, those look like great questions. Inga, and I'm sure you're going to get some very interesting responses, but I'm very much going to put on my economist hat right now. And I would say that it might be helpful to have a bit more emphasis on priorities and cost effectiveness, because I don't know about you, but I've never met a scientist who didn't say we need a lot more data. So you know that's the answer you're going to get. So I think the question might be, you know, what are critical decisions that aren't being supported or urgent or something? And then maybe with respect to new technologies, what are some things that could reduce costs and improve data? It might be a good focus for that, or not. I'm not saying you should rule out just exploring new techniques that have other good characteristics beside cost effectiveness. But and then I just, the little survey nerd in me noticed one thing about one of your questions. You said something like, is the data adequately informing management decisions? And at least in that question, you didn't really break out there's really two aspects to that question. Is the data, does the data have the right scope and, you know, frequency or whatever it needs to have to sort of be informative? And then the second part is, are the managers actually using it? And those were kind of combined into one question. And so we try to, you know, a lot of times we try to separate those things out when we're doing surveys.
All right. Very, very much appreciated. And of course, the cost runs through all of it. And usually we just assume there isn't enough money for monitoring. So, but yeah, but it's good to spell that out. Thank you for that.
Inga, I have a clarifying question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I just don't see the raised hands.
Yeah. Yeah. This is not my, you know, field, but looking at the question, I thought, you know, there are many contaminants, right? So is there any question that says which contaminants are they concerned about upfront? So
I would say that's included in those questions, which limitations are, can't remember quite how we said it. What limitations do you see, or what data needs do you have, you know, but it could be more clearly spelled out, of course. Yeah, of course, there are thousands of contaminants. Yeah.
Okay.
And gaps and identifying gaps, it's all kind of in there. Yeah. Please, co-leads, please correct me if I said something wrong or if something isn't clear. Yeah.
So I know you can't see. So related to that, we really want to stay focused on process rather than did they miss a specific contaminant, right? Because a lot of this is regulatory based, and so but process about how they deal with that problem of mixtures, how they deal with the sampling. Is it extensive enough? Is the sampling picking up maximums or minimums? Is the how do they process the data? How do they use it not only for regulatory requirements but for ecological risk and stuff? Rather than there are many laundry lists of chemicals that have been measured, and I don't, I don't think we're going to adjust that. We may talk about emphasis, but at least my view is we're really about process, the sampling, the process of the data, the use of the data, those kind of things.
Let me just respond. Yeah, that's definitely a very important part. I would say if there are glaring omissions of contaminants that are clearly important, or, you know, that are, I would say we wanna say something about that. You know, we can't go through each and every contaminant and evaluate whether it should be on that list or not. Other people have done that, and I'm sure they have had very good reasons to put them on the monitoring list. Yeah, but I'd say if there are glaring omissions, we should also be able to say something to that. Yeah, anybody else, please? No.
Who wants to join the team? A leadership
On
team.
the team.
That's a better.
Well, I think this interview phase for me is very important because it's also going to set the tone for what comes next, right?
Mhm.
So there will be an analysis of the interview responses to these questions. And I'm glad we have Tanya on there, social scientist who has experience in analyzing that. And then we will go from there. So we will give you regular updates, of course, on the progress. But the next half year, I think, will be taken up with this interviewing phase. So, okay, thank you very much for your input. Always appreciate it. And we will move ahead and keep you informed. Thank you. Are there any public comments, Edmund?
There are none.
All right. Well then, let's move on. We're almost at the end of our meeting in that case. Are there any public comments for matters that are not on the agenda?
There are none.
There are none. Well, in that case, I will hand over to Edmund for the preparation for upcoming Delta ISB meetings and items to follow up.
Yeah, thanks, Inga. So our next Delta ISB meeting will be a virtual meeting. It will be on November 12th. Some of the topics that we have on the agenda includes a Delta Science Plan presentation and then a review of it from the Delta ISB. The science plan should be released before that meeting. We will also discuss any public comments received to date on the subsidence review and will provide an opportunity for the public to also provide some oral comments before the deadline of December 1st. And then we'll also have a Delta lead scientist report for November. Our December meeting will be in person. It'll be from December 4th to 5th. So typically with our in-person meetings, we want to coincide it with a big event occurring in the region or maybe doing some sort of field tour. But due to the rescheduling of our December meeting, it actually coincides now with the Delta Invasive Species Symposium on December 1st. So we're going to encourage board members to attend that symposium. It is somewhat timely given the board's interest in the golden mussel invasion earlier this year. And also during the legislative briefing, Lisa mentioned there was interest from legislative staff on the board touching on invasives again. Following that will be our in-person business meeting on December 5th. We are going to build this one as like a planning retreat. Since we do have new board members, we want to use this meeting to start brainstorming some future reviews and preparing our work plan for 2026. The idea behind this planning retreat is that we also want to receive updates on past ideas to see if they are warranted now. So you may recall a few years ago, the Delta ISB was thinking about a harmful algal blooms review. A lot has changed since those discussions occurred. So we're currently in the planning of organizing some presentations related to what has occurred with HABs recently. That's all we have for those two meetings. In terms of follow-up ideas, follow-up items from today, we mentioned the subsidence review is now out for public comments. Board members, please also read the latest draft and prepare any written comments also by the December 1st deadline, which is the same deadline for the public comments. In terms of the climate symposium, the review leads will be working on the first product of the review, the short memo summary. They aim to have a draft by early December for discussion. A follow-up item from today is that Steve Lindley, you mentioned that you'll be doing some follow-up research on the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and the ENSO changes under warming. You'll be providing some write-up about that follow-up research that you will be doing. For the contaminants monitoring review, the leads are going to be embarking on interviews later this fall. And then they will take into consideration the comments from today. That's all I have for this report, and I don't see any public comments, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Edmund, could you repeat again what is occurring earlier in that week of the in-person meeting? It was a symposium?
So December 4th is the Delta Invasive Species Symposium. So that's the event that board members should be attending. Registration, I don't believe, has opened yet, but as soon as we see it, we'll share it with the board. It'll be in Sacramento.
Thank you.
Okay, and Obi has his hand raised. Obi?
You're muted, Obi.
Obi, you have your hand raised, or maybe it's a leftover.
No, I'm muted. I'm okay now. Thank you. Edmund, I think based on the comments from the other board members today, we may need to make some minor modifications for the slide deck to the council. Is that something you want me to take a stab at and send that to you?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
I also have an idea for one modification to the slide, and I'll send that over to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. So you and I can work maybe tomorrow sometime before our dry run. Something like that. Yeah. Okay.
I'll have to be today since the meeting for the council is tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll send something over quickly after.
Yeah. Okay. I'm getting confused because of the time difference. That's okay.
And I just wanted to quickly touch base about moving forward with the climate symposium products. It seemed, it's a lot of things are still fresh in people's heads right now. If anybody wanted to write down thoughts, expand on what you said today, or maybe you didn't say anything, you have thoughts, feel free to send those to Edmund, I guess would probably be best. I'm not sure how we're organizing that next phase, but it is nice to get these comments, and we did also get some written comments.
Yeah. Besides writing the summary, there might be some other actions we can work on. This whole issue of science to practice, type gap maybe, and what are the things that could be done in the near future versus far future, those kinds of things. I don't know, there are some things that we could work on that might be helpful.
Yeah, I think we still have that perspective piece product that we haven't really fully fleshed out yet. So maybe that's something.
Yeah, maybe we can try to use some comments from today and some of the written comments we've received to start forming that.
Yeah, and please don't forget to raise your hand if you want to be co-lead for the review that of the Delta plan, draft Delta plan. So that's coming up.
Just to clarify, we have not received that yet. Is that correct?
No, we have not. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, November 12th isn't that far off. So,
yeah.
So we'll just see when it arrives, right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It was good to see you. And I adjourn the meeting for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.